LPT. Don't hang up on emergency services. Tell them you didn't mean to call. As a 911 dispatcher, I'll always upvote this LPT when it comes up. If you hang up, I have to call you back and see if I have a good address for your number, assuming I didn't get a good location from your call. If I have a good address, then I need to waste a police officer's time to go check it out and make sure there's nothing going on. Seriously, just stay on the line. Accidents happen. You won't get in trouble and I'll appreciate you staying on the line to tell me it was an accident. Have you ever sent a police officer to a location, even though the person on the other end said it was an accidental call? If something seems fishy, I'll add that to the call comments, basically explaining why I think there's more going on than what the person is letting on to. If someone stays on the line to say it was an accident, it usually means it really was an accident. Someone who was trying to hide something or was going to call but changed their mind will hang up. If I hear yelling or screaming, or if something doesn't seem right about what I'm hearing, it goes into the call. So the real answer is, it depends. Most of the time, if they say it was an accident, that will be that, and no officer will be sent. If there's more that's being heard, or the person on the other end is acting strange, someone might keep heading that direction. I've always wondered that. I swear I read this life tip like a year ago, and I've accidentally hit the button at least like 6 times since. Every time I get off the phone I wonder to myself, I wonder if they think that sounded weird, or did I sound weird? Interesting. How do you accidentally dial 911 that many times in a year? As a 911 dispatcher I can say this is true. Also, most accidental dials only show estimated locations of where the call came in. If you stay on the line and provide an address, then we have a good address associated with that number that called. So if there is an emergency in the future with that number, a quick search will result in a good address to send help to. Question: at what points do I have to stay on the line? For example, if I realize my mistake as the call is ringing out, but before it's been answered, can I still hang up, or do I need to wait for someone to answer to say there was an accident? On the system I worked on, as soon as it starts ringing it is bringing up all info associated with that number, address and everything if a landline. Phase 1 or phase 2 location info if it is a cell. Been a decade or so since I worked in one, so it might better now. So as soon as it rings I would stay on the line. It really isn't that big of a deal, and it happens all the time. Just say, I apologize. I missed the ale but didn't want to hang up once it was connecting. They will ask your name and info and some questions to make sure they aren't suspicious and let you go. Literally happens a few times a day. This is true. Almost invariably, when the 911 center receives a hang-up call, we would send a unit out to check things out. What if called via cell phone? Can you triangulate cell phone signals? All modern 911 centers have a system called Daily Automatic Location Identifier, which gives an approximation of caller location based on nearest cell phone tower. It's accurate to 50-300 meters depending on rural/urban area. They also have an automatic number identifier which traces the number of the phone, both land and cell, being used to make the call. To my knowledge, it bypasses number blockers because it's a 911 service. I had to call 911 last year for someone breaking into my home. It sent me 2, maybe 3 towns over and I kept having to be transferred. Is this active everywhere in the US? Yes, but it's most accurate in more dense places where I grew up. For example, calling 911 on a cell phone would cause you to be bounced around because so many little towns in a big area. Mobile carriers are also a major part of the chain. They supply the alley information to the 911 center. Automated process. Bigger companies like Verizon and Sprint are better than smaller ones by far. Nationwide coverage doesn't just apply to data usage, it's also relatively new and has a lot of kinks that can make things like your situation happen even under ideal circumstances, unfortunately. Recently learned about the callback when my 3-year-old managed to dial 911 trying to unlock my phone. I hung up as soon as I realized what she did before they answered. When they called back I apologized profusely and they didn't send anyone out because I'm sure they heard her sweet voice in the background saying, "Is that the police?" I hope it never happens again, but now I know to stay on the line if it does. Thanks. I'm not a 911 dispatcher, but if I heard a sweet baby talking instead of dealing with another home invasion it'd be nice. You sure about that? Imagine just sitting there on a nice long slow day, polishing your nails, reading a book, doing something, when suddenly you get the call. You think AWW. What a cutie pie. Then she starts to describe what could be the most horrific thing, but so casually because the child can't process what's going on. Now tell me it'd be nice. Calm down, Satan. The response to this varies by jurisdiction. For example, in my county, in Florida, they always dispatch an officer, period. No matter what you tell them, you're getting a visit from an officer. I found this out because of a quirk of a telephone app I have on my phone. The phone system at our company has a soft phone app that you can install on your phone. Using that app, you can make calls from your cell phone as if you were sitting at your desk. It's great for when you want to work from home. Anyway, if you dial 112 from within the app, it dials emergency services 911. Well, there's a person at our company who I call a lot with the extension 112. I managed to call 911 3 times on separate occasions before I realized what the hell was happening. They were pissed. I was pissed. Everyone was pissed. As it turns out, 112 is an emergency services number in most of the world and is literally part of the GSM standard link. Wikipedia.org/wiki/112 emergency_telephone_number. So if you have GSM based cell service and you dial 112 \0 even in the United States, you'll get connected to 911. The 112 extension is now officially blacklisted at our company. No one will be assigned it. I had trouble with my old candy bar style Nokia cell phone. It would pocket dial emergency services way too many times. That's when I discovered SOS dialing happened under a bunch of numbers. 911, 999, 119, 811, 112. 211 are the ones I tested, but didn't hit dial. Those brought up the SOS option. You can see they included backwards dialing in case you panicked. I even modified the keypad to require a very deep press of the send key to stop this issue, but it still happened one more time. A friend in high school once bet me $10 I wouldn't call 911, so I did. And told them that I had just gotten a new phone and was testing that I entered the number into the emergency auto dial button correctly. They said no problem. Have a good day. Dick wouldn't pay me my money though. You deserve that money. This comes especially handy with all the modern phones coming with press power button 5 times to call emergency services. I have had my share of slower phones and impatiently tried to unlock them, only to get redirected to emergency services. Tries to turn up volume, accidentally calls 911. If I hang up before they answer, is it the same way, or does this only apply once I've been connected with someone? If you hang up prior to the dispatcher answering, it still goes through to 911. Cool, thanks for the info. I accidentally did this a couple months ago. On my phone there's an emergency feature where if you press the power button 5 times you'll dial the emergency number. I was trying to turn my music off and didn't realize I was pressing the power button until I heard the call go through. I panicked and hung up immediately before it reached a dispatcher. A couple minutes after they called me, I just told them what happened and they were cool with it. This happened to me. OnePlus/Android. I was fidgeting/spasming on the power button. Heard a voice coming from my pocket. On a Plus. It doesn't always work. The police still showed up at my apartment and wanted to look around. I learned this one the hard way in college. I was working the phone bank in the alumni house to make some extra money. The one on my phone was sticky, so I'd dial 9 to get an outside line, then 1 before the area code, but IT'd stick, and when I'd attempt to dislodge the key, I would inadvertently engage the 1 again. Voila. 911. When the 911 dispatcher came on the line, I freaked and hung up without saying anything. 15 minutes later, a cop shows up, looks around, then has a word with my boss. After hearing the cop's story, my boss looks down at the list of numbers corresponding to our call stations. Then she looked right at me and glared. "Did you call 911? She growled. "Not on purpose," I pleaded. "My one key is sticky. See? And listen," she said. "If you ever call 911 and it's not an emergency, stay on the line and tell them that. Tell them you misdialed. Tell them the devil made you do it. I don't care. Just don't hang up without saying anything, or they're required to send an officer over to investigate." Got it, got it. I mumbled, and sunk lower into my chair than I thought any human was physically capable of sinking. To this day, I'll never forget, if you dial 911, stay on the line, unless you really want the cops to come. My husband but dialed 911 2x in a week. Thankfully the wonderful dispatchers on the line didn't send someone out. They were very understanding. My husband was very embarrassed and felt so bad for taking up their time with a butt dial. Years ago I once had a cop show up saying they received a call from my address. My parents were out and it was just me and 2 friends. I said nobody called from here. He started pushing the issue and I pushed back like, "No, 100% guarantee are the only 3 here and all 3 of us say we didn't call and none of us are under duress. And no, you may not come in, but thanks for the concern." We happened to be high AF, but kept it cool. Then a day later another cop shows up with the same crap. Same response. Later that day I go to use my line, second landline in the house. Old school, and I hear a bunch of noise, clicking and static. Find out there was a bad connection at the box and, coupled with some bad weather and some bad luck, my phone was the phantom caller in the end. I fixed the issue, called the local station, explained and probably removed my address from some list. More importantly, phone system administrators, plan your future dial plan upgrade to utilize 10-digit dialing. This will prevent 99% of accidental 911 calls. And Kara's law went into effect a little over a week ago, so 911 has to dial directly out. Really odd thing happened to me once. I was sitting outside the front of a pub I worked at when a stolen car came hurtling down the lane and crashed into a line of parked vehicles like a pinball. I took my phone out of my pocket to dial 999. I'm in the UK. Somehow, my ass had unlocked dialing and already called 999. Then hung up. About 5 minutes before, police showed up immediately and arrested the guy. It was the only time I've ever ass dialed anyone, and the timing was perfect. My uncle has a phone for old people. It has a button that calls 112. He keeps calling every fucking day like 50 times by accident, and he just hangs up. I wonder when is he going to get in trouble. When my kids were young years ago, I bought a new phone with a big red button to call 911. When the kids took the receiver off to call their friends, they accidentally hit the button. Phone went in the garbage after the second time. One evening my partner and I were leaving the theater, and it was pouring down. So we ran to our car. We decided to get Macca's before going home as it was late and we hadn't eaten yet. After going through the drive-thru, my partner's phone started to ring. It was a private number. Now usually neither of us answer private calls, but it was past 10 PM. So getting a private call at this time was weird. My partner answers his phone and I hear the person on the other end explain it was the police and that they were at our house looking for him and asked if he were okay. It transpired that when we ran to our car in the rain, somehow my partner accidentally butt dialed 000. It was very embarrassing. TLDR, partner butt dialed 000, sending the police looking for him at our house and calling him. I had a friend butt deal 911 while we were playing Hitman and talking loudly about our heinous actions in the game. AHH. Good times. They were concerned at first, but took it well. I did this the other day trying to make a phone call from a hospital. I literally clicked the first 3 buttons. Instructions say to start with 911, then type 10-digit code. I added a 1 for us calls, and it auto-called 911. I had to explain to her it was an accident and everything was all good, and she thanked me saying it is better to do that than hang up immediately. Good LPT. The us call 1 is part of that outgoing extension. The system is set up to pressing 9 gives outgoing. Pressing 1 is just super common, so they added it as a step. What an important LPT. Don't be embarrassed. It happens. Just apologize and hang up. I called back, and they still had to send someone. The cop was cool though. She just had to walk through the house and said she actually likes those calls because there's basically no paperwork. Several years ago I dialed 911 by accident and quickly hung up before they answered. I got a call back pretty quick confirming if I'm okay, and the operator told me it's best to stay on and just tell them it was an accident. Fast forward to a few months ago. I'm cooking dinner with my phone in my pocket listening to a podcast. I wanted to turn the volume up, so I reach in my pocket and start hitting what I thought was the volume button. Turns out I was hitting the power button, and if you tap it enough times in succession it calls 911. Shit. But I remembered to stay on the line. I got a recording rather than an operator. The recording said that all operators were busy and to stay on if you have an emergency. WTF. I hung up, so I won't be taking up critical time from real emergencies. Nobody ever called back. Can you imagine having a critical emergency and getting that recording? Holy shit. This was in Phoenix, Arizona. I used to work as a receptionist in an office where you had to dial 9 to get out of the building, then 1 if it was a different area code. We had at least one misdialed 911 a month. Of course, dialing out never showed your direct line, but the main line, so I'd always get the call back at the front desk. Then we had to make sure no one keeled over at their desks and accidentally hung up on 911 during an actual emergency. A couple of times. Police, without sirens, just showed up to check. Very frustrating and annoying on my end, but I can only imagine it's way more stressful on the dispatcher's end. A law was just enacted to prevent this from happening. Phone lines in businesses that cause this type of confusion are now required to notify designee which phone called 911 and be able to provide a dispatchable location. Raybaum's Act and Karras Law, requiring 911 to be dialed without a prefix, both now are in effect. This is a random thought, but I feel like people in this sub and in r/show our thoughts listen to the Stuff You Should Know podcast and then just post stuff from there here because it keeps happening over and over that something gets posted that's related to recent episodes. There was a recent episode on 911 and this was a tip in there. Maybe it's just a coincidence though. That until so many of the posts seem to coincide with recent ISK episodes. I think till is more what I was thinking than show our thoughts. They show up anyway. At my office we used to have to dial 9 for an outside line. 911 was accidentally called a bunch. They'd always call back, but they also always sent a cop over. When I was a stupid little kid, my class took a field trip to my state's State House and State Museum, where we were lucky enough to meet our senator and learn about politics. But me being me, thought I could impress some girls who were on the field trip with by calling 911 on a payphone that was right next to us and hung up. I honestly thought that I didn't dial the whole 3-digit number and put the phone back on the rack before I pushed the last number. But it turns out that I had called them, and an officer tracked me through the surveillance cameras around the state campus to find me. My heart dropped when the officer opened the door while we were being presented to and called for me name. I wasn't suspended or anything, just couldn't go outside for recess for a while. Edit, typo. Surveillance. It took me a minute. It's surveillance. Thanks for catching that. My best friend's phone number growing up started with 3911. and sometimes our phone would register the 3. I probably called 911 5 or 6 times as a kid this way and hung up every time. They either called back immediately and or a car came out. When I was a young teenager, back before cell phones were big, I used to accidentally dial 911 all the time. I lived in a city where the area code was only 1 digit off, and we had to dial the area code. So about once a month I'd be trying to call one of my friends, fat finger a wrong digit, and all of a sudden I'd be talking to a 911 operator. I would stay on and explain my mistake, but they would usually send a police officer out anyway just to check. Maybe because I was a child they wanted to make sure everything was okay. Always felt bad for wasting their time. Story time. On time 2 of my friends were wrestling in the house. Now let me clarify that this one friend named Brian can shriek like a banshee. Also, it is apparently super easy to call emergency services from an Apple Watch. Some of you may get where this is going. So Johnny puts Brian in a headlock during this indoor wrestling match. So Brian starts shrieking and flailing. Johnny sees that he was on call with emergency services, so he panics and hangs up. Not 2 seconds later he gets a call back. For some reason Johnny's first thought was that his work was calling, so he calmly answers his phone to an operator wondering if everything was okay, because as soon as she answered the phone all she heard was a scream and then dial tone. Johnny reassures the operator that everything is fine, but she decides to send dispatch to the house just in case. Shortly after we see a police officer slowly working his way around the house before we came out to inform him on what happened. Hey, thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.